Have you ever witnessed 3 HOA board members roll up on someone like a SWAT team, all because the guy was holding a fishing rod? I have, and that guy was me. One minute I was relaxing with a cup of strong black coffee at the edge of the lake behind my cabin, listening to the call of loons echoing across the still water. The next, I was face to face with a trio of self-important suburban dictators screeching up in a golf cart, acting like they were about to take down a cartel operation. The ringleader, a bleach-blonde woman with wraparound sunglasses and a laminated clipboard, pointed at me like I just committed a felony. "Sir, you are in violation of HOA Code 7B.5. Unauthorized recreational angling." I nearly dropped my pole laughing. That was the moment I realized they weren't just annoying, they were dangerous in that special way only power-drunk volunteers can be. And they had absolutely no clue who they were messing with. It was a quiet Sunday morning, the sky bright blue, the water calm as glass, only the soft lapping of the lake against my dock breaking the silence. I had my usual setup, a fold-out chair, my dad's old tackle box, and a cup of gas station coffee that somehow always tasted better outdoors. Fishing wasn't just a pastime for me. It was my sanctuary, my therapy, my peace. The lake had sat peacefully behind my property for the entire 10 years I'd owned the cabin. Never once had anyone told me where, when, or how I could enjoy it until now. The tires of their golf cart crunched along the gravel path with all the fake authority they could muster. Karen the clipboard queen stepped off that cart like she was a Roman general descending from her chariot. Flanking her were 2 other HOA board members, one guy who religiously wore socks with sandals and a woman who once filed a noise complaint against a neighbor's wind chimes. Together, they looked like the worst possible version of the Avengers. Karen flipped open her clipboard and dramatically pointed at my fishing rod. "Do you have a valid HOA fishing tag?" I blinked at her. "Didn't know I needed one to fish from my own dock." "It's not your dock," she sniffed, chin tilted sky high. "The lake is community property, and the board recently passed a resolution requiring fishing permits for wildlife protection." "Wildlife protection?" I raised an eyebrow. "Lady, the only wildlife in this lake are a couple of frogs, 3 ducks, and a catfish with a limp." Karen didn't care. She slapped a bright yellow notice against my chest. "You've been cited. $600 fine. Further violations will result in legal action." I couldn't help myself. I laughed. Not just a chuckly-a-full, deep belly laugh that echoed across the water. "You think this is funny?" she snapped. "I think it's ridiculous," I replied, standing up and folding my chair. "I've been fishing here for 10 years. This isn't some HOA pool. It's a lake. Who even owns it?" "The HOA manages this land," Karen said smugly. "Which means it falls under our jurisdiction." That night, when I got home, I found a glaring orange warning taped to my front door like I'd been caught running a drug operation. It threatened escalating fines, legal action, and suspension of my so-called community privileges. I stared at the letter for a long time, then crumpled it up and tossed it in the trash. I wasn't angry yet, but I was extremely curious. The next morning, brand new signs had appeared like weeds overnight. Big, bold letters screamed, "Fishing prohibited. Violators will be fined." One was mounted directly next to my dock. Another stood tall near the tree line where I usually parked my canoe. I took a long breath, walked back inside, and made a phone call I hadn't made in years. Barry picked up on the second ring. He was an old buddy from college and now my go-to lawyer for business filings and the occasional contract dispute. "Jack, if this is about the time I told your ex she could keep the dog, I'm still sorry." "Not that," I said. "I need you to look up something for Meth Lake behind my cabin. I want to know who really owns it." Barry paused. "Thinking lawsuit?" "Not quite," I replied. "I'm thinking checkbook." By Tuesday, Barry had the answer, and it wasn't what either of us expected. The lake wasn't technically HOA property. It had been part of a large land deal decades ago when the area was still just dirt lots and empty promises. The original developer leased the lake to the neighborhood for community use but never finalized the purchase. The deed still sat with a dormant holding company. In other words, the land was up for grabs. "They think they own it," Barry told me. "But nobody ever actually bought it. So what would it take to buy it now? Find the successor to the holding company, make them an offer, and it's yours." 2 days later, the paperwork was in motion. I kept my head down, waved politely when Karen drove by scowling in her golf cart, and played dumb while I signed the first draft of the acquisition proposal. Barry called it a surgical strike. I called it beautiful. A week later, I stood again on my dock, rod in hand, smiling at the fishing prohibited sign right beside me. They wanted to play territorial? Fine. They picked the wrong fisherman. In 2 weeks' time, I wouldn't just be fishing on that lake, I'd be owning it. And when that happened, every one of their petty little rules would sink faster than a cinder block tied to an anchor. A week later, I stood again on my dock, rod in hand, smiling at the fishing prohibited sign right beside me. They wanted to play territorial? Fine. They picked the wrong fisherman. In 2 weeks' time, I wouldn't just be fishing on that lake, I'd be owning it. And when that happened, every one of their petty little rules would sink faster than a cinder block tied to an anchor. The satisfaction of knowing I was about to flip their whole game upside down was sweeter than any fish I could have reeled in. But I wasn't rushing this. No, I was savoring every moment of their ignorance. Barry worked the legal angles like the pro he was, ensuring the paperwork was watertight. I kept a low profile, attending the next HOA meeting just to listen. Karen sat at the head of the table in the community center, oozing that smug confidence like a snake shedding its skin. She read through a list of new lake enforcement guidelines, throwing out things like kayak registration stickers, approved shoreline access times, even a dress code for lake activities. A dress code for the lake. I nearly choked on my plastic cup of punch. But nowhere in her speech did she mention the lake's actual ownership. She didn't know. None of them knew. Meanwhile, Barry was closing the deal. The holding company turned out to be owned by an elderly couple living in Florida, who'd inherited the rights from a cousin and had no idea anyone still cared about the property. Barry's offer was generous enough to make their decision easy. The moment I held the signed deed in my hands, it felt like I'd won a chess game 10 moves ahead. This wasn't just about fishing anymore. This was about principle and about sending a message that bullies don't always win. I didn't announce my victory right away. Instead, I quietly hired a crew from the next town over. People the HOA had never seen. Befarito install 12 large, handcrafted wooden signs around the lake's perimeter. They were beautiful, bold, and direct: private property. No trespassing. Residents not welcome. Violators will be prosecuted. I watched from my porch that morning as the neighborhood group chat exploded. Photo after photo of the signs started circulating. Karen was tagged in nearly every comment. By 9 a.m., I heard the familiar whine of her golf cart screeching toward the lake. I strolled down, coffee in hand, taking my time. She was already yelling when I approached. Who authorized this? Who put these signs up? Dean doesn't own this lake. I stopped a few feet away, smiled calmly, and held up the deed folder. Actually, I do. I flipped the folder open, letting the stamped, notarized document do the talking. Karen's mouth opened, then snapped shut like a fish gasping on the dock. This land, this lake height's mine now, I said. Bought it legally. Documented officially. The HOA never owned it. The original owner sold it to me. The signs are legal and you're standing on private property. Her face turned the color of a ripe tomato. This is impossible. We've used this lake for years. Using something and owning something are two different things, I replied. You assumed. You never checked the paperwork. I did. She spluttered, reaching for any kind of retort. We'll call the city. We'll seize it. Public interest. I shook my head, grinning. Eminent domain doesn't work like that, Karen. The city's not going to help you steal private property because your HOA has a bruised ego. Her voice cracked. You can't just ban people. The whole neighborhood will hate you. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice to a calm, deliberate tone. Oh, I know. That's the best part. By noon, a small crowd had gathered at the lake, reading the signs, confused and curious. One by one, I spoke with them, explaining the truth. Calmly, rationally. I showed the paperwork. This was never HOA property. Karen and the board never owned it. They just acted like they did. Now, thanks to their harassment, I've decided to restrict access. It's not personnel, it's policy. The same way they like to do it. Karen stormed back to the clubhouse and called for an emergency board meeting. She wanted to file an injunction against me, sue me for community theft, and even pass a special resolution declaring the lake neighborhood domain. But the board laughed her down, especially after Barry sent them a cease and desist letter along with copies of the deed and a friendly warning that any slander would trigger a defamation lawsuit. The next morning, Rick, one of Karen's more aggressive board members, tried to make a stand. He marched down to the lake with a fishing rod and dared me to stop him. I didn't even get up from my porch. I just called the sheriff's office, handed them a copy of the deed, and watched from a distance as Rick got served with a trespassing warning and a hefty citation. The cracks in Karen's empire were showing. Neighbors were starting to question her leadership. Some were angry at me, sure, but many more were starting to realize they'd been lied to for years. And the best part? This was just the beginning of my plan.